The Adventure of Silver Blaze Story from Sherlock Holmes.
One morning, as we were sitting down at breakfast together, Sherlock Holmes said, "I'm afraid I must leave." "Watson." "Leave? Where to?" "To Dartmoor, to King's Pyland." To say that I was surprised would be an understatement. If anything was astonishing, it was that he had remained indifferent for so long to an affair that had stirred all of England. The previous day, he had spent from morning till night pacing up and down with his head bowed, his brows knitted, smoking pipe after pipe without uttering a single word and responding to none of my questions. He had glanced at all the newspapers only to toss them aside. Though he said nothing, I knew perfectly well what occupied his thoughts. He could have been thinking of nothing other than the mysterious disappearance of the favorite for the Wessex Cup and the tragic death of its trainer. His announcement that he intended to go to Dartmoor was merely the confirmation of what I already knew. "If I should not be a burden, I would very much like to come with you," I said. "A burden? On the contrary, you will be doing me a great service. I believe the trouble will be well worth it, for there seem to be certain features in this case that are quite unprecedented. If we leave at once, we can catch the train from Paddington. We can discuss the details on the way. And by the way, it would be wise to bring that excellent pair of field glasses of yours. They may come in handy." An hour later, Sherlock Holmes and I were traveling toward Exeter in a first-class compartment. My friend sat with his ear-flapped cap pulled low and that sharp, intent expression on his face, studying the newspapers he had picked up at Paddington. We had left reading well behind us when he finished the last paper, tucked it under the seat, and offered me his cigar case. After glancing out the window and then at his watch, he said, "Our speed is good, 84 kilometers an hour." "I didn't see any kilometer markers," I replied. "There aren't any. But once you know that the telegraph poles along this line are spaced 55 meters apart, the rest is child's play. You are familiar with the murder of John Straker and the disappearance of Silver Blaze, are you not? Only as much as was reported in the Telegraph and the Chronicle. This is a case that requires not the discovery of new evidence, but the careful sifting of what we already possess. I shall have to employ every ounce of my reasoning power. It is a highly unusual affair and of great importance to many people, which is precisely why it has given rise to such a mass of conjecture, speculation, and hypothesis. The real difficulty lies in separating the absolute facts from the embellishments of those who reason about the case and those who report it. Once we are on solid ground, we can determine what conclusions may legitimately be drawn from the known facts and identify the cornerstones of the mystery. On Tuesday evening, both Colonel Ross, the owner of the horse, and Inspector Gregory, who is handling the investigation, telegraphed me requesting my assistance. "Tuesday evening," I exclaimed, "but today is Thursday. Why did you not go yesterday?" "Because I made a mistake, Watson. Those who know me only through your writings may imagine that I am nearly infallible, but the truth is quite otherwise. I assumed that England's most famous racehorse could not remain hidden for long in a desolate place like Dartmoor. Yesterday, I fully expected to receive word that the horse had been found and that the thief was also the murderer of John Straker. When no such news arrived, apart from the arrest of Fitzroy Simpson, I decided to set out this morning. Still, I do not believe that yesterday was entirely wasted." "Then you have formed a theory." "At least I have grasped the main elements of the case. I will explain them to you now. Indeed, the best way to understand a problem is to explain it to someone else. And unless you are thoroughly acquainted with the facts, how could you possibly assist me?" I leaned back against the cushions, lit my cigar, and listened as Holmes began his account, touching the tips of the fingers of his right hand to the palm of his left as he spoke. Silver Blaze is descended from isonomy, and his record has been scarcely less distinguished. He is now 5 years old and has won every prize his owner, Colonel Ross could reasonably desire. Until this catastrophe, he was the favorite for the Wessex Cup, with odds of 3-1. He had been the favorite in every race he had entered and had never disappointed those who backed him. Even now, vast sums have been wagered upon him. For this reason alone, there are many people for whom his victory next Thursday would be most undesirable. The incident occurred, of course, at King's Pyland, where Colonel Ross's stables are located. Every precaution had been taken to protect the champion horse. His trainer was John Straker, a former jockey who had turned to training after gaining too much weight. For 12 years, 5 as a jockey and 7 as a trainer, he had served Colonel Ross faithfully and enjoyed his full confidence. 3 men worked under Straker. The stable was small, housing only 4 horses. One of the 3 men remained on watch each night in rotation, while the other 2 slept in the loft above. All 3 were considered entirely trustworthy. Straker was married and lived with his wife in a small detached house 200 meters from the stable. They had no children, only a maidservant, and were comfortably off. The area was extremely isolated, though about 800 meters away stood several villas built by a Tavistock contractor, occasionally occupied by invalids and others seeking Dartmoor's pure air. Tavistock itself lies 3 kilometers to the west. 3 kilometers in another direction, across rough moorland, stands Mapleton, a larger stable owned by Lord Backwater and managed by a steward named Silas Brown. Apart from wandering gypsies, scarcely anyone lives in the surrounding countryside. Such was the general situation on the Monday night of the tragedy. That evening, the horses were exercised and watered as usual, and the stables were locked at 9 o'clock. 2 of the stable hands went to the trainer's house for supper, while the third, Ned Hunter, remained on duty in the stable. Shortly after 9, the maidservant, Edith Baxter, carried Hunter's supper to him. The meal consisted of curried mutton. She brought no drink, since there was a water tap inside the stable and regulations allowed the watchman to drink nothing else. As it was pitch dark outside, she carried a lantern. When Edith Baxter was about 25 meters from the stable, a man suddenly emerged from the darkness and told her to stop. As he approached, she was able to see him clearly by the lantern light. He was a well-dressed man in a tweed suit, with a cloth cap on his head, gaiters on his legs, and a heavy knobbed walking stick in his hand. His face was remarkably pale, and his manner nervous. She judged his age to be just over 30. He said, "Excuse me, but where am I? I've lost my way. Had I not seen your light, I should have resigned myself to spending the night outdoors." She replied, "You are near the King's Pyland stables." "Indeed," he cried. "What a fortunate coincidence. I gather that the groom is alone in the stable and that you are carrying his supper. Surely you would not let false pride prevent you from earning the price of a fine dress. Am I right?" With that, he took a folded paper from his waistcoat pocket and said, "Give this to the groom, and you may buy yourself the best dress money can buy." Shocked by the bluntness of his proposal, the girl passed him quickly and hurried to the stable, where she handed the supper through the window, as usual. Hunter was seated at the table inside, with the window already open. As she was telling him what had happened, the same man appeared once more. "Good evening," he said, looking in through the window. "I should like a word with you." The maid was certain she saw the edge of a small piece of paper in his hand. "What do you want here?" asked the groom. "I've come to make you a profitable offer," the man replied. "You have 2 horses running in the Wessex Cup, Silver Blaze and Bayard. If you give me reliable information, you too may profit. Is it true that Bayard is in much better form and that you have backed him with your own money?" "So you're one of those cursed tipsters," shouted the groom. "I'll show you how we deal with your sort here." He rushed off to release the dog. The girl fled in terror toward the house, but as she ran, She glanced back and saw the stranger leaning into the window. When Hunter returned a minute later with the dog, the man had vanished, and despite a thorough search, they could not find him. One moment, I interrupted. Did the groom lock the door when he went to fetch the dog? Excellent, my dear fellow. Excellent, murmured Holmes. That point caught my attention as well, and I had it confirmed by telegram yesterday. The boy did indeed lock the door when he left. The window, moreover, was far too small for a man to pass through. Hunter remained at his post until his colleagues returned and informed the trainer of the incident. Straker, though he did not fully grasp its significance, was greatly agitated. He was unable to sleep that night. According to Mrs. Straker, he rose from his bed in the middle of the night and dressed. When she asked the reason, he replied that the events of the evening had disturbed him and that he wished to go to the stable to check on the horses. Despite her urging him not to go out in the rain, he put on his long waterproof coat and left the house. When Mrs. Straker awoke at 7 the next morning and found that her husband had not returned, she hastily dressed, summoned the maid, and went at once to the stable. The door was open, and Hunter was found collapsed on a chair, dazed and stupefied, as if drunk. Silver Blaze's stall was empty, and there was no trace of Straker. They awakened the two men sleeping in the loft, but both were heavy sleepers and had heard nothing during the night. Hunter was clearly under the influence of a powerful drug and incapable of coherent speech. The two grooms, accompanied by the women, set out to search for Straker and the horse. At first they hoped that the trainer had simply taken the horse out early for exercise, but when they reached a nearby rise from which the surrounding land was visible and found no trace of the animal, they realized they might be facing a tragedy. Straker's raincoat was discovered hanging from a bush some 400 meters from the stable. Beside it lay a shallow, bowl-shaped hollow, and at its bottom they found the body of the unfortunate trainer. His skull had been crushed by a heavy blow, and he bore a wound high on the thigh, clearly inflicted by a sharp instrument. There were signs that Straker had defended himself bravely, for in his right hand he clutched a small knife, stained with blood up to the hilt, and in his left he held a red and black necktie. The maidservant identified this tie as the one worn by the stranger she had encountered near the stables that night. Hunter, once he recovered, also confirmed that it belonged to the same man. According to Hunter, the stranger must have drugged his food while speaking to him at the window, thus leaving the stable unguarded. Footprints in the mud indicated that the horse had been present in the hollow at the time of the struggle. Yet despite a substantial reward for the horse's recovery and the active involvement of the local gypsies, no trace of Silver Blaze has been found to this day. Hunter's remaining food was analyzed and found to contain a large quantity of powdered opium, though everyone else had eaten the same meal without ill effect. That, Watson, is the case as I can present it to you without commentary. Now I shall tell you what the police have done. Inspector Gregory, who is in charge of the investigation, is thoroughly competent, though he lacks imagination, a deficiency that has prevented him from reaching the very top of his profession. He quickly arrested the man upon whom suspicion naturally fell, and indeed the fellow was not difficult to locate, as he was staying in one of the nearby villas. His name is Fitzroy Simpson. He comes from a wealthy family and received an excellent education, but having squandered his fortune on horse racing, he now earns his living by keeping accounts for sporting clubs in London. An examination of his betting book revealed that he had wagered £5,000 against Silver Blaze. He did not deny visiting King's Pyland in hopes of obtaining inside information, nor did he deny calling that same evening at the Mapleton stables to inquire about the condition of Desborough, the second favorite, under the supervision of Silas Brown. He confirmed the accounts given by the maid and the groom, but claimed that his sole purpose had been to obtain first-hand information. when shown the necktie. He turned pale and was unable to explain how it had come into the dead man's possession. His clothes were wet, indicating that he had been out in the storm that night, and his heavy walking stick was certainly capable of inflicting the fatal head wound. On the other hand, he bore no injuries himself, whereas the knife in Straker's hand suggested that at least one assailant should have been seriously wounded. Such, in summary, is the case. If you can offer me an idea, my dear fellow, I shall be deeply obliged. Holmes's clear and methodical account held my complete attention. Much of it I already knew, yet I had failed to grasp the connections and relative importance of the facts. Could it not be possible, I ventured, that Straker, in his death throes, accidentally wounded himself with a knife? That is indeed very probable, Holmes replied. And in that case, the strongest point in the accused man's favor disappears. Still, I find it difficult to see what theory the police can seriously advance. At present, no fully coherent theory is possible, Holmes answered. As I understand it, the police believe that Fitzroy Simpson drugged the groom's supper, somehow obtained the stable keys, entered the stable, and led the horse away. The bridle is missing, which supports the idea that he put on the horse and led him off. The trainer then either encountered him by chance or followed him and caught up with him, leading to a struggle. Simpson struck Straker on the head with his heavy stick, and Straker, unable to defend himself effectively with the small knife, failed to injure his attacker. After finishing Straker, Simpson either took the horse away to some unknown place or the horse, startled by the struggle, bolted and is still wandering somewhere on the moor. Such is the police theory, but like all the others, it is thoroughly unsatisfactory. Once we arrive, I shall be able to test it at once, but for now, we can go no further. When we reached the small town of Tavistock, set like a shield's boss in the heart of Dartmoor, it was not yet dark. Two men were waiting for us at the station. One was a bearded man with hair like a lion's mane and piercing blue eyes. The other was a small, elegantly dressed gentleman in a frock coat and gaiters, with neat side whiskers and spectacles. The smaller man was the famous Colonel Ross. The other was Inspector Gregory, whose name was becoming well known in the English police force. I am very pleased that you accepted our invitation, Mr. Holmes, said the colonel. The inspector has done all that could be done, but I wish to leave no stone unturned in avenging poor Straker and recovering my lost horse. Has there been any new development? Holmes asked. I regret to say that we have made little progress, replied the inspector. There is a carriage waiting outside. I thought you might wish to visit the scene before nightfall. A minute later, we were seated in the comfortable carriage, rolling toward the Devonshire countryside. Inspector Gregory had much to say and talked at length along the way. Holmes listened attentively, interjecting questions from time to clarify certain points. Colonel Ross sat back in silence, his arms folded and his hat pulled low over his eyes. I listened intently to the exchange between the two detectives. Gregory outlined his theory of the crime, which closely resembled the one Holmes and I had discussed on the train. The net is tightening around Fitzroy Simpson, said the inspector. I believe him to be the murderer, though I admit that the evidence is largely circumstantial and that further developments could undermine it. And what of the knife in Straker's hand? We concluded that he wounded himself when he fell. Dr. Watson suggested the same possibility on the train. If that is so, another point in Simpson's favor disappears. Exactly. The man had no knife, nor any wound. The evidence against him is substantial. The disappearance of the favorite would have been of immense benefit to him. There is no doubt he was out in the storm that night. We suspect him of drugging the groom's supper. He carried a heavy stick that could serve as a weapon, and his necktie was found in the victim's hand. All this should be enough to convince a jury. Holmes shook his head. A clever defense lawyer would tear that evidence to shreds, he said. Why would the man remove the horse from the stable? If he intended to harm it, he could have done so on the spot. Have you found the stable keys? Where did the opium come from? And most importantly, how could a stranger to the district hide such a famous horse? And where? What does the man himself say about the paper he asked the maid to give to the groom? He claims it was a 10-pound note. We did, in fact, find 10 pounds in his wallet. As for the other difficulties you mention, they may not be as serious as you suppose. The man is not entirely unfamiliar with the area. He stayed in Tavistock twice this summer. The opium could have been obtained in London. The key may have been discarded after the deed. As for the horse, he may have killed it and thrown the body into one of the old mine shafts in the vicinity. And the necktie? He admits it is his, but says he lost it. However, a new factor has emerged that may explain why the horse was led away from the stable. Holmes listened intently. We discovered traces indicating that a group of gypsies had camped about 1.5 miles from the scene on Monday night. They left on Tuesday. If Simpson had made an arrangement with them, he might have intended to hand the horse over to them when he was interrupted by the groom. In that case, the horse may now be in their possession. That is conceivable. We are searching the entire district for those gypsies. I have also ordered inspections of every stable and country house within a 15-kilometer radius of Tavistock. There's another stable near Colonel Ross's, is there not? Yes, and it certainly deserves consideration, since the horse Desborough, kept there, is the second favorite for the race. The people there would have much to gain from Silver Blaze's disappearance. The trainer, Silas Brown, has wagered heavily on the upcoming race and was on bad terms with the deceased. However, we have examined that stable as well and found nothing to connect it with this affair. You have found no evidence of collusion between Simpson and the Mapleton stable? None whatsoever. The conversation came to an end. Holmes leaned back, lost in thought. After a few minutes, the carriage stopped beside a small villa by the roadside. It was a charming little house with a red-tiled roof and overhanging eaves. Some distance away, beyond a fenced pasture, stood a country house with long gray roof tiles. All around us stretched a vast expanse of bronze-colored, withered bracken, broken only by the distant bell tower of Tavistock and a cluster of buildings to the west, which we took to be the Mapleton stables. Holmes alone remained seated in the carriage, gazing fixedly at the horizon. When I touched his arm, he started, returned to himself, and stepped down. Turning to Colonel Ross, who was staring at him in astonishment, Holmes said, "My apologies. I was lost in thought." From long experience, I recognized the gleam in his eyes and the excitement he was striving to conceal. I was certain that he had seized upon a clue, though I could not even guess what it might be. "I suppose you would like to proceed at once to the scene of the murder, Mr. Holmes," said Inspector Gregory. "Actually, I would prefer to remain here for a short while and ask a few questions so that I may fully grasp the details. Straker's body was brought here, was it not?" "Yes. It is upstairs at present. The post-mortem examination will be conducted tomorrow." "Colonel Ross, Straker had been in your service for some time, had he not?" "Yes. He always served me to the best of his ability." "You must have examined the contents of the deceased man's pockets." "Everything that was found is now in the sitting room. You are welcome to examine it." "I should be obliged," said Holmes. We all adjourned to the room and seated ourselves around a round table. The inspector opened a square metal box and spread its contents before us. A matchbox, a candle 5 centimeters long, a pipe made from wild rose root, a sealskin tobacco pouch containing about 30 grams of tobacco, a silver watch with a gold chain, 5 gold coins, an aluminum pencil case, several papers, and a slender, sharp-pointed knife with an ivory handle engraved Weiss and Company, London. Holmes took up the knife and examined it carefully before turning to me. Judging by the bloodstains, this must be the knife found in the victim's hand. Watson, I believe this is a type of knife used in your profession. Yes, I replied. We call it a cataract knife. That was my thought as well. A delicate instrument designed for delicate work. It is rather curious that a man should carry such a knife for a task that was anything but delicate. Moreover, it is hardly suitable for being folded away and carried in the pocket. We found a core from a bottle near the body, which he appears to have used as a sheath, said the inspector. According to his wife, the knife lay on the dressing table, and Straker took it with him when he left the room. It may not be an ideal weapon, but he may have chosen it simply because it was close at hand. Very likely. And these papers? 3 are invoices from Haim merchants. 1 contains Colonel Ross's instructions. And this one is a bill for clothing purchased at Madame Legerier's boutique on Bond Street, totaling £37, 15 shillings. It is made out in the name of William Derbyshire. Mrs. Straker stated that Mr. Derbyshire was a friend of her husband and that letters often arrived here addressed to him. Examining the bill, Holmes remarked, Mrs. Derbyshire must have expensive tastes. More than 450 shillings for a single outfit. I believe I have learned all I can here. We may now proceed to the scene. As we left the room, a woman who had been waiting in the corridor stepped toward the inspector and grasped his hand. She was pale and thin, still clearly under the shock of her ordeal. With difficulty, she asked, Have you found them? Have you caught them? No, Mrs. Straker. But this gentleman beside me is Sherlock Holmes. He has come from London to assist us, and together we shall do all that lies in our power. Mrs. Straker, said Holmes, we met recently at a garden party in London. Did we not? No, sir. You must be mistaken. Impossible. I would swear that you were wearing a dove-colored dress adorned with ostrich feather trimmings. I have never owned such a dress, the woman replied. Then I must be in error, said Holmes, apologizing before following the inspector out of the house. After a short walk across the grounds, we reached the hollow where Straker's body had been found. The bush upon which his raincoat had been hung stood immediately beside it. If I understand correctly, there was no wind that night, said Holmes. That is correct, but there was heavy rain. In that case, the raincoat could not have been blown onto the bush by the wind. It must have been placed there deliberately. Yes, it was neatly draped over the branches. This affair grows more interesting by the minute. The ground here is badly trampled. I presume many people have passed through since Monday. We laid down a mat along the edge of the hollow and stepped only upon that. Excellent. This bag contains one of the boots Straker was wearing, a shoe belonging to Fitzroy Simpson, and one of Silver Blaze's horseshoes. My dear Inspector, you are surpassing yourself, exclaimed Holmes. He took the bag, descended into the hollow, adjusted the mat slightly, and lay flat on his stomach. Resting his chin upon his hands, he examined the trampled mud intently. Suddenly he cried, Look at this! What is it? He held up a half-burned matchstick, so thickly coated with mud that it resembled a small twig at first glance. The inspector was chagrined. How could I have missed that? He exclaimed. It could scarcely be seen. It was buried in the mud. I found it only because I was looking for it. What? You expected to find a match there? More or less. He compared the boot from the bag with the footprints on the ground, then climbed out of the hollow and began moving forward on hands and knees among the bracken and bushes. I fear there are no more traces, said the inspector. I examined everything within a 100-meter radius with the greatest care. Holmes straightened up. Then I shall not presume to repeat your work. Still, I should like to walk about a little to familiarize myself with the terrain. It may assist me in tomorrow's investigation, and I shall put this horseshoe in my pocket. It may bring me luck. Colonel Ross seemed far from impressed by my friend's calm and methodical manner. Glancing at his watch, he said, "Perhaps we should return to the house, Inspector. There are several matters I wish to discuss with you, including whether we ought to withdraw our horse from the race." "Absolutely not," Holmes exclaimed with sudden energy. "If I were in your position, I would not withdraw the horse." The colonel bowed slightly. "I'm very pleased to hear you say that, sir. After you have finished your walk, you may come to Straker's house. We shall go to Tavistock together." He and the inspector walked back toward the house, while Holmes and I set off across the moor. As the sun sank behind the Mapleton stables, the bushes and withered bracken on the sloping plain before us were tinged with a reddish golden glow. Holmes, lost in thought, took no notice of the beauty around us. At last he spoke. "This way, Watson. For the moment, we shall set aside the question of who killed John Straker and concentrate solely on what became of the horse. If we assume that it fled during or after the struggle, where might it have gone? Horses are highly social animals. Acting on instinct, it would either return to King's Pyland or make its way to the Mapleton stables. Why should it wander alone across the moor? If it had, it would surely have been found by now. Nor is it likely that the gypsies stole the horse. Such people flee at the first scent of trouble, as they wish to avoid the police. They would not risk stealing so famous an animal, which would be exceedingly difficult to dispose of. These points are quite clear. Then where is the horse? As I said, it must have gone either to King's Pyland or to Mapleton. Since it is not at King's Pyland, it must be at the Mapleton stables. Let's accept that hypothesis and follow it to its conclusion. As the inspector noted, the soil in this part of the moor is hard and dry. But if you look toward Mapleton, you will see a long ditch. That ditch was almost certainly wet on Monday night. If our assumption is correct, the horse must have passed through it, and there we should find its tracks. We walked briskly as he spoke, and within minutes we reached the ditch. At Holmes's suggestion, I proceeded to the right while he went to the left. I had scarcely gone 50 paces when I heard Holmes call out. Turning, I saw him waving to me. Clear hoof prints were visible in the soft earth before him. Holmes produced the horseshoe from his pocket and compared it with the prints. They matched exactly. "You see the value of imagination," he said. "That is what Gregory lacks." We imagined what might have happened and acted upon that assumption. And, as you see, we were right. Come, let us continue. After crossing the muddy bottom of the ditch, we walked some 400 meters over firm, grassy ground until the terrain sloped upward once more and the hoofprints reappeared. After a time, they vanished again, only to reappear after another 800 meters, now very close to the Mapleton stables. Holmes was the first to spot them. Pointing them out, he looked at me with a proud and satisfied expression. Beside the hoofprints were human footprints. The horse was alone up to this point. I exclaimed, "Precisely, but not beyond it. Let us see what comes next." The tracks made a sharp turn in the direction of King's Pyland. At Holmes's whistle, we both followed them. While Holmes kept his eyes fixed on the ground, I glanced about more freely and was astonished to notice that the same tracks also led in the opposite direction. When I pointed this out, he said, "Well done, my dear fellow. Had you not noticed that, we should have walked the same path twice. Come, we shall follow the tracks going the other way." We had little distance to cover, for the tracks ended on the paved ground before the Mapleton stables. As we approached the gate, a groom rushed out. "We don't want vagrants here," he said sharply. Placing his thumb and forefinger into his waistcoat pocket, Holmes replied, "I only wish to ask a single question. Would it be too early if I came at 5 tomorrow morning to speak with your steward, Mr. Silas Brown?" "Bless you, sir. If anyone is awake at that hour, it will certainly be Mr. Silas Brown. He rises earlier than anyone. In fact, he is here now. You may ask him yourself, "No, sir, no, I cannot take this money." He will be furious. But since you insist, as Holmes returned the 10-pound note to his pocket, an elderly man with an angry expression burst out through the gate, brandishing a whip. "What's going on, Dawson?" he shouted. "Didn't I tell you no gossip? Get back to your work. And what the devil are you two doing here?" In a most courteous tone, Holmes replied, "I should like to speak with you for 10 minutes, sir. I haven't 10 minutes to waste on tramps. We don't want strangers here. Be off at once, or I'll loose the dog." Holmes leaned forward and whispered something into the man's ear. The fellow recoiled as if struck, his face flushing to the ears. "A lie," he shouted. "A vile lie. I understand. Would you prefer to discuss this matter here, before everyone, or inside?" "Very well, inside, then." Smiling, Holmes said, "I shan't keep you long, Watson. Come along, Mr. Brown." 20 minutes later, when Holmes returned with the trainer, the reddish glow over the moor had long since faded into gray. Never in my life had I seen a man change so completely and so swiftly as Silas Brown. His face was ashen, beads of sweat stood upon his brow, and the whip in his hand trembled like a leaf in the wind. Nothing remained of his blustering, domineering manner. He clung to Holmes like a chastened dog. "Your instructions shall be carried out to the letter," he said. "I will tolerate no mistakes," Holmes replied, fixing him with a hard stare. Brown quailed beneath the threat he read in Holmes's eyes. "No, no mistakes at all. He will be there. Would you like me to change anything?" Holmes paused for a moment, then laughed aloud. "No, I shall send a telegram regarding the matter. Do not get it wrong, or else it will not be wrong. You may rely on me." "I believe I can," said Holmes. "Expect word from me tomorrow." Ignoring the trembling hand extended toward him, Holmes turned sharply on his heel and marched away. As we walked toward King's Pyland, he remarked, "A man who combines cowardice, bluster, and cunning as thoroughly as Silas Brown is a rare specimen." "So the horse is with him?" He tried to deny it at first, but when I recounted everything that had occurred that morning in exact detail, he became convinced that I had followed him. You noticed the square heels and the footprints as well. They matched Brown's boots precisely. As the earliest riser on the estate, it would have been impossible for any of his men to carry out such a scheme without his knowledge. I described how he rose as usual before dawn, noticed the strange horse on the moor, and approached it. I told him how he immediately recognized, by the white blaze on its forehead, the only horse capable of beating the one on which he had staked his own money. At first, he led it toward King's Pyland, but then, yielding to temptation, decided to hide it in the Mapleton stables until after the race. When he heard the entire story laid bare, he was willing to agree to anything to save himself. But they searched that stable. A rogue who has devoted his life to horses has tricks without end. Still, how could you trust such a man with a horse? It would serve his interests to harm it. Do not worry. He will guard that horse as carefully as his own eyes. It is his only chance of escaping this affair. Otherwise, no mercy would be shown him. Colonel Ross does not strike me as a particularly merciful man. Colonel Ross shall know nothing of this. I intend to resolve the matter in my own way and tell him only as much as I deem necessary. That is the advantage of unofficial work. You may have noticed, Watson, that the Colonel's manner toward me was somewhat patronizing. I should like to take a little revenge for that discourtesy, so please do not mention the horse to him. As you wish. In any case, this matter is trivial compared to discovering John Straker's murder. Will you focus on that now? On the contrary, we returned to London by the night train. I was thunderstruck. We had arrived only a few hours earlier. The investigation was proceeding brilliantly, and yet my friend spoke of abandoning it altogether. It was incomprehensible. We exchanged not a word on the walk back to King's Pyland. When we arrived, the inspector and the colonel were waiting for us in the sitting room. "My friend and I shall return to London on the night express," said Holmes. "The fresh air of Dartmoor has done our lungs a world of good." The inspector stared at him in astonishment, while the colonel merely curled his lip. "So you have given up hope of arresting poor Straker's murderer," said the colonel. Holmes shrugged. "I fear there are formidable obstacles in the way. Still, I hope your horse will run on Tuesday, so you would do well to keep your jockey ready. Might I ask you for a photograph of Mr. John Straker?" The inspector produced a photograph from an envelope and handed it to Holmes. "My dear Gregory, you always anticipate my needs. I shall ask you to wait here a moment. I must put a question to the maidservant." After Holmes left the room, Colonel Ross spoke frankly. "I must say that our London consultant has disappointed me. Since his arrival, we have made no progress at all." "At least he assured you that your horse will run," I replied. Shrugging, the colonel said, "True, he assured me of that. I would have preferred him to produce the horse instead." I was about to defend my friend when Holmes returned. "Very well, gentlemen," he said. "We may now go to Tavistock." As we entered the carriage, one of the grooms held the door open for us. Suddenly Holmes seized the man's wrist. "You have a few sheep," he said. "Who looks after them?" "I do, sir." "Have you noticed anything unusual lately?" "Not particularly, though 3 of them have begun to limp slightly." Holmes was visibly pleased by the answer. He rubbed his hands together, chuckling softly. "That's it, Watson. Exactly it," he said, squeezing my arm. "Gregory, take careful note of this strange ailment among the sheep. Now, let us be off." Colonel Ross still wore the same dismissive expression, clearly underestimating my friend's abilities. Gregory, however, fixed his attention upon Holmes's every word and gesture. "Do you really believe this to be important?" he asked. "Immensely important. Is there some important point you wish to draw my attention to? Did the dog's strange behavior that night not strike you?" "The dog did nothing at all that night." "That is precisely what is strange about it," Holmes replied. 4 days later, Holmes and I boarded the train and set off for Winchester. Our purpose was to witness the running of the Wessex Cup. As arranged, Colonel Ross met us outside the station. We entered the colonel's carriage and drove toward the racecourse on the outskirts of the town. His face wore an expression more severe and colder than usual. "I have not yet seen my horse," he said. "But you would recognize your horse if you saw it, would you not?" Holmes asked. The colonel was visibly irritated. "I have been involved in horse racing for 20 years, he said, "and this is the first time anyone has ever asked me such a question." Even a child could recognize Silver Blaze by the white blaze on his forehead and the mottling on his forelegs. And how stand the odds? That is the strangest part of all. Until yesterday, the odds were 15-1, but they have steadily fallen to 3-1. "Indeed," said Holmes. "Someone clearly knows something." As the carriage drew up at the racecourse, I examined the placards and read the entries. The Wessex Cup. Entry fee, £50. Open to 4- and 5-year-old horses. First prize, £1,000. Second, £300. Third, £200. New course, 2,400 meters. 1. The Negro, owned by Mr. Heath Newton. Red cap, cinnamon-colored jacket. 2. Pugilist, owned by Colonel Wardlaw. Pink cap, blue and black jacket. 3. Despereaux, owned by Lord Backwater. Yellow cap and sleeves. 4. Silver Blaze, owned by Colonel Ross. Black cap, red jacket. 5. Iris, owned by the Duke of Balmoral. Black with a yellow stripe. 6. Raspier, owned by Lord Singleford. Purple cap, black sleeves. We withdrew our other horse from the race and placed all our hopes on Silver Blaze. Trusting in your word, said the colonel. But how can this be? Is not Silver Blaze the favorite? Silver Blaze at 4-5, rang the bell. Silver Blaze at 4-5. Despereaux at 3-1. Silver Blaze coming onto the course. There they are, I cried. All 6 of them. If all 6 are present, then my horse must be running, exclaimed the colonel. But I cannot see Silver Blaze. My colors have not passed. 5 have passed. This next one must be yours. Even as I spoke, a powerful bay horse emerged from the weighing enclosure and passed us at a steady canter, bearing the colonel's famous red and black colors. That is not my horse, the colonel shouted. There is not a trace of white upon that animal. What does this mean, Mr. Holmes? Holmes replied with perfect composure. There is no cause for concern. Let us wait and see what happens. After observing through his field glasses for a few minutes, he suddenly cried, Splendid! A magnificent start! There they are, rounding the bend and coming toward us. From our box, we had an excellent view of the horses as they entered the home stretch. All 6 were so closely bunched that they could have stood upon a single carpet. Until halfway down the straight, the Mapleton Stables horse led the race. But before they reached our position, the colonel's horse made a powerful move, past Despereaux, and drew ahead by 6 lengths. The Duke of Balmoral's Iris managed no better than third. Wiping his eyes, the colonel said with difficulty, overcome by emotion, one way or another, I have won. I must confess that I understand nothing of this affair. Do you not think it is time to explain the mystery, Mr. Holmes? You are quite right, Colonel. I shall keep you in suspense no longer. Let us now examine the horse more closely. When we reached the weighing enclosure, accessible only to owners and their companions, Holmes said, Here he is. Clean the horse's forehead and legs with alcohol, and you will see your Silver Blaze. I cannot believe it. Your horse was in the hands of a rogue. I entered him in the race as soon as I recovered him. You have performed a remarkable service, sir. The horse looks perfectly sound and in excellent condition. He has never run better. I offer you 1,000 apologies for ever doubting your abilities. You have done me a great favor in restoring my horse, and you would do me an even greater one by finding John Straker's murderer. Holmes replied calmly, I have already found him. The colonel and I stared at him in astonishment. You have? Where? Here. Here. Yes, here with me. The colonel flushed crimson with anger. I'm sincerely grateful to you for finding my horse, but unless that remark was meant as a grotesque joke, it is a grave insult. Holmes laughed. I'm not accusing you, Colonel. The true murderer is standing immediately behind you. Stepping past the colonel, he laid his hand upon the gleaming neck of the thoroughbred. The horse, we cried out together. Yes, the horse. However, since it was a case of self-defense, the penalty may be mitigated. Colonel, I regret to tell you that John Straker was not worthy of your trust. But the bell has rung. Let us watch the remainder of the racing, and at a more convenient time, I shall explain the entire affair in detail. That night, as we returned to London, seated in the far end of the Pullman carriage, the journey seemed all too short as Holmes recounted the case. One could not help but admire the manner in which he had unraveled the events that took place on Dartmoor that Sunday night. I must admit, he began, that the theories I formed from reading the newspapers were entirely wrong. Worse still, I constructed those theories despite knowing how insufficient my information was. Even while traveling to Devonshire, though I recognized that the evidence against him was weak, I believed Fitzroy Simpson to be the murderer. It was just before we arrived at Straker's house, while you were all stepping out of the carriage and I remained lost in thought, that I realized the significance of the curried mutton. At that moment, I reproached myself bitterly for having overlooked so vital a clue. "I must confess," said the colonel, "that I still fail to see how the meal relates to the solution of the case. It was the first link in the chain of reasoning. Though powdered opium does not taste unpleasant, its flavor is extremely sharp and unmistakable. Had it been added to any ordinary dish, the diner could not have failed to notice it. Nothing, however, conceals the taste of opium so effectively as curry. Fitzroy Simpson had no means of ensuring that curried mutton would be served that evening. True, it was most unfortunate for him that opium was found in the groom's meal on a night when he had been present, but he could not have been the murderer. My attention, therefore, turned to those who could decide what was to be eaten that night: John Straker and his wife. The opium must have been added after the meal was prepared, since no one else who ate it was affected. Thus, I had to determine who could have accessed the groom's food without the maidservant's knowledge, after it had been set aside. Before I resolved that question, however, I grasped the full importance of the dog's silence that night. One sound deduction inevitably leads to another. From the encounter with Simpson, it was clear that there was a dog at the stable. Yet although someone entered the stable and removed the horse, the dog did not bark or awaken the grooms sleeping in the loft. The intruder, therefore, must have been someone well known to the dog. By then, I was almost certain that John Straker himself had taken Silver Blaze out of the stable in the middle of the night. But why? His intentions were clearly sinister. Otherwise, why drug his own groom's supper? Yet his purpose eluded me. I knew that trainers sometimes placed large bets against their own horses through intermediaries and then ensured their defeat, sometimes by withdrawing the jockey, sometimes by subtler or more blatant methods. Was this such a case? I suspected that the contents of Straker's pockets might provide the answer. And indeed they did. You will recall the peculiar knife found in his hand. No sensible man would choose such a weapon for self-defense. As Dr. Watson observed, it was a knife designed for the most delicate surgical procedures, and that night it was intended for precisely such a task. Colonel Ross, you are experienced in racing matters. You know very well that if one makes a fine subcutaneous incision in a horse's tendon, the injury is invisible to the naked eye. The animal will merely limp slightly, a condition easily attributed to overtraining or rheumatism. No suspicion would arise. The villain, the scoundrel, cried the colonel. We also know why Straker took the horse out onto the moor. A noble animal such as that would have made enough noise at the first touch of the blade to rouse even the heaviest sleeper. The deed, therefore, had to be done in the open. How blind I was, exclaimed the colonel. Now I understand why he carried a candle and matches. Quite so. But as I examined Straker's possessions, I learned not only how he meant to commit the crime, but why. Colonel, as a man of the world, you know that people carry their own bills, not those of others. The moment I saw the invoice, I knew Straker had a mistress. Judging from a bill, she was a woman of extravagant tastes. No matter how generously you paid your staff, one could hardly expect a stable hand to purchase a lady's dress costing over 400 shillings. I questioned Mrs. Straker discreetly and learned that the dress had never reached her. I then obtained the address of the boutique that issued the bill, hoping that a visit there, with Straker's photograph, would unravel the mystery. From that moment onward, the sequence of events was clear in my mind. Straker led the horse to a hollow where no light would be visible. He noticed the tie that Simpson had dropped while fleeing and picked it up, perhaps thinking it might serve to bind the horse's leg. Once in the hollow, Straker moved behind the horse and struck a match. Either startled by the sudden flare or sensing danger instinctively, the horse lashed out and struck Straker squarely in the forehead. Though it was raining, Straker had removed his raincoat to work more freely, and as he fell, the knife in his hand cut into his thigh. Have I explained it clearly so far? Perfectly, exclaimed the colonel. It is as though you were there. That brings me to my final move. I could not believe that a cautious man like Straker would attempt so delicate an operation without first acquiring practice. As I pondered how he might have done so, my attention was drawn to the sheep. A few questions to one of the grooms confirmed my suspicion. Upon returning to London, I visited the boutique that had issued the invoice for the woman's clothing. The proprietor immediately recognized Straker, whom she knew as William Derbyshire, and described him as the devoted husband of a flamboyant woman with a passion for costly attire. I had no further doubt that this extravagant mistress had driven Straker deeply into debt, and that desperation had led him to this diabolical scheme. You have explained everything but one point, said the colonel. Where was my horse? Your horse bolted after the incident and was found by one of your neighbors. I believe we may be forgiving on that score. We are now passing Clapham Junction, and if I am not mistaken, we shall reach Victoria in 10 minutes. Should you care to honor us with a visit and a cigar, I shall be delighted to share a few further details.